اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا وذليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك توعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. Again, welcome to all participants. Today is our first session of Should We Preserve Our Khoja History, which is from 10:30 to 11:30, inshallah. Sorry for the delay of start. We will have our second session, inshallah, tomorrow at 5:15 to 6:15 p.m. And we will be in the presence of Sheikh Kazim Bhojani, who has been with us from the start. So without further ado, I would pass on the floor to Sheikh, inshallah. أحسنت.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. I welcome you all to this two-session course titled Should We Preserve Our Khoja Heritage? This is the general title, and there's going to be two separate discussions, and I'll mention the relevance of these topics to the general title. So today, let me share my screen with you so you can see my PowerPoint, so that makes it easier for you to follow the discussion. I just need to make sure that everything is okay. My voice can be heard, my video is seen, and also you can see my screen and the first slide of the presentation. If someone can just confirm that, then
Yes.
I'm ready to go.
Yes, inshallah, we can everything.
Okay. Firstly, before I begin, I would like to I pray and hope that you are going through a very blessed month of Ramadan. It's the month of spirituality, paying attention to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's the month of divine invitation, and we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives us those very, very special blessings that He has in store for us during this month, inshallah. So the general title is Should We Preserve Our Khoja Heritage? In order to answer this question, I'm going to go into this another discussion regarding our identity, because this question is going to answer all. This question, that should we preserve our Khoja heritage or not, is very heavily dependent on the question of our identity. And if we have clarity about this question of what does it mean to be a Khoja Muslim in Africa, which is each one of you, and how do we combine different conflicting identities that are with us. So inshallah, if we answer this question well, the answer to the question whether we should preserve our Khoja heritage and in what sense and in how much amount is going to become clear. So let me begin my discussion, but before I begin, the discussion is going to be around 45 minutes. So it's already 5 minutes of my time is finished. So I'll speak for about 40 to 45 minutes. And the last 10 to 15 minutes I'll leave for question and answers. Although if you want to interrupt me, you're more than welcome to do so. I don't mind that. If there's something very urgent that you want to ask, you can ask me, or you can even type it in the chat box. I'll be constantly checking if you have any comments to make. So let me begin. So this is the title of my course, A Khoja Muslim in Africa Caught in Conflicting Identities. So let me go to the next slide. Okay, so let me very briefly define what identity means. Of course, I don't want to get into a lot of technical discussion, boring stuff. I know it's weekend, it's tomorrow is Saturday, Sunday. I'm sure most of you would have been to the mosque and might be tired, so I don't want to bore you with a lot of theory. But let me very briefly define what identity means. So there are so many questions that we all have and we try to answer. Who am I? What's my role in life? What do I represent? What's my contribution to society, to community, to people? What's my ultimate destination? So, all these questions that are to do with my life and my role and my contribution to the society, answers to these questions form my identity. So, if I want to define it in one line, my identity is I'm coming to the more interesting stuff, but it's always good to begin with a clear idea of topic we are discussing. So we are talking about identity, and what we want to do in this session is to talk about what's that correct and ideal identity that we should be holding and carrying. But generally, identity is a sum total of my beliefs, as you can, I'm reading from the screen, my likes, my hopes, my aspirations, my cultural practices, my actions, and my contribution. So basically, in other words, it's everything that I stand for and I represent and I uphold. So all of us, when we go in the society, we represent something. We stand for something. We are upholding a worldview, a set of values, a set of cultural practices. It's so closely attached to our existence. So all of us have identities attached to us. So different nations, different ethnicities. So we as the Khoja Shia Ithna Ashari community, we have a certain identity. So we have certain beliefs, we have certain things which we like, we have certain hopes and aspirations. We have a set of cultural practices. So for example, the Kadak Chai is one of the cultural practices that we have. The food, clothing, our language preferences, then how we act in the society, how we do business, how we interact with other communities in the society. And then a very important part of our identity is what is our contribution to the place and the location we are in. So all of this together forms a certain identity. And the community to which we belong, the Khoja Shia Ithna Ashari community in Africa, in East Africa, has a certain identity to itself. Okay, let me move on. I want to very briefly talk about this idea that why are we talking about this question of identity? It sounds a bit very far away, far-fetched. Maybe probably this is the first session you are attending about this topic of identity. The reason we are discussing this is because if we have the correct identity, it's going to ensure our success both as individuals and as a community. And if we miss on this question of identity, then it's going to create chaos and confusion. So why talk about identity? Because if I don't acquire the right identity, and that's what we're going to speak about, that what's that ideal identity that I, as a Khoja Muslim living in Africa, East Africa, should have? What's that right and ideal combination? But before we reach there, if let us say I don't have a clear identity, I have a confused identity, then it's going to cause havoc in my life. What's going to happen? I don't know who am I don't know what I'm doing in life. One day I'll go this direction, the other day I'll go that direction. One day I'll be following this track, other day I'll be following another track. And if we as individuals and also as a community don't have that identity, and our identity is going to be confused, it's going to make us lead very, very shaky lives. So there'll be no consistency in what we do. And that's something we don't want, right? When we live our lives, we want to have stable lives which are not shaky. Okay, so this is one thing that we want to avoid, confused identity. There's another thing also that we want to avoid, and that is incorrect identity. And what happens in incorrect identity is that I identify myself with wrong goals. So for example, if I make my ultimate goal individual pleasures and gathering wealth, then with this wrong and incorrect identity, when I'm going to come in society, I'm going to do more harm than good. Why? Because I have set my role in life to be, for example, gathering maximum wealth, just developing my business, and I have forgotten other aspects of my life. So incorrect identity can be very dangerous, and it can take a whole community on a wrong path. Okay. Sometimes people end up in this state, which I'm going to name it as conflicting identities. And this becomes a really funny thing, that they want to acquire two identities which are in conflict with each other. So let me give an example. So imagine a person from our own community, and you can find real examples like this. Of course, we are not pointing fingers at people. We're just trying to imagine that this can happen with us as well. So, for example, imagine a person who wants to be Islamic, because that's a part of our identity. We are a Muslim community. But at the same time, he also wants to acquire the modern materialistic identity fully. Okay. So now he wants to be 100% modern, enjoy all the pleasures that modernity has brought, halal, haram, everything, but at the same time have that Muslim identity, Islamic identity as well. It's not possible. It creates a conflict in his own soul, and it leads to a lot of tension, and this such people live a very, very stressed life, because on one side they want to be Muslims, they want to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they want to retain that Islamic identity, but at the same time they also want to get access to unlimited material pleasures, which the modern identity gives us, that completely you just make your sole goal seeking of these material pleasures. So this is also something that we want to avoid as individuals and also as community. And the last thing, and I'm just explaining why are we discussing this topic, and the last thing that we want to really, really avoid is identity crisis. And whereby what happens is that I actively dismantle all the identities I have. So one part of my identity is being a Khoja. Another part of my identity is being a Muslim. Another part of my identity is being a Tanzanian or Kenyan or another country in East Africa. These are those elements which are part of our identity. If I actively destroy all these identities, so for example, I remove my Khoja heritage completely. Okay. I remove Islamic teachings and identity completely. I make it to the minimal. And I also don't have any African element to my identity. That's a really, really bad situation to be in. Why? Because in such a situation, what happens is that the dominant identity which rules the world today, which is defined by individualism and an endless pursuit of material desires, is going to fill that gap. Because look, we as humans can never be free of identity. We have to have some goals. We have to have some aspirations. We have to have some likings. Human beings cannot be without these things. So if I don't actively build my identity, the materialistic identity is going to take over my life. And we can see examples of that in our community. That people, their identities were weakened, and what happened was it made room for the materialism to come and take over their lives, and then it becomes just an endless pursuit of material desires, and it leads a person away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we want to avoid all that, and that's the reason we are talking about this topic. So I showed you the pitfalls of not having the correct identity. Now, let me very briefly mention the benefits of having the right identity. And inshallah, I'm coming to that point, that what's that right identity and set of things that we ourselves should identify with, we should have. So inshallah, I'm coming to that point. So, but if I have the right identity, it gives me a sense of peace and belonging. So I get a sense that I belong somewhere. I have an identity. I'm part of something big, a society, a community. It gives me sense of social success and contribution. So if I have the right identity, I'm going to show what it is. If I'm able to build that right identity and right likings for myself and sense of attachment, then I can contribute to the society, and it really gives me that sense of social success that I'm doing something. It also gives us motivation and stability. And one of the problems that is out there, especially people who migrate from Eastern societies to the Western societies, is that they face a certain identity crisis and lack of motivation. They do not belong to the East nor to the West. So it's kind of they're stuck in between in a state of crisis, and it takes away all their motivation and stability. And the last benefit of having correct identity is that it protects us from foreign and destructive identities and culture. And that's why it's so important that we have to preserve our identity, and we need to be very, very clear about what do we want from our lives, what's the goal, what's the path, where are we headed, where are we placed, what's our duty and responsibility as individuals and even as the community. So if you want to stay away from foreign influence and encroachment of materialism into our community, we'll have to work and solidify these identities. So this is the important question that we have, and that is that, so what is that correct social identity that we should carry? Okay. You might wonder, why did I say social identity? So before I move on, I just want to mention this one small point, and that is that, look, we have two types of identities. All of us have two personalities, if I want to say it like that. So we have a personal identity, which includes everything that makes me me. Okay, so all of us have very unique characteristics. So in terms of my potentials, in terms of my likings, in terms of what I do in the society as an individual, in terms of, for example, what football team I support, all of these are part of my personal identity, right? This is what I represent. So if, for example, if I'm a Liverpool fan, that's part of my identity. If I'm part of some other club, that's part of my identity, but it's a very personal thing, right? I don't think so we as a community have a single football team that everyone supports. It's a rather personal preference of people as to what team they support. You may wonder, what team do I support? Okay. And the answer is that, sorry, unfortunately, I don't support any team as such. So, but if you support a certain team, if you like a certain type of food, if you like certain type of reading books, that's part of your identity. Wherever you go, you are carrying that identity with you. People can see these characteristics in you. But we have a very important part of our identity, and that is our social, or I would like to say, community identity, whereby we have this sense of belonging somewhere, where we go and interact with other people. That gives us some kind of protection. It stops foreign influence from intruding into those social spaces. So our discussion here today is more about our social identity or our community identity, and what exactly and how exactly it should look like. I'm continuing my discussion. It's slightly a new topic, so I really have no idea, because it's an online class. I can't even see any of my participants. There's like more than 30 people who are listening to me. So I'm really not sure, am I making any sense, or it's like I've been speaking Greek up until now. I really, really hope that I have been making some sense so far. If you have any comments that you want to make, so this was just a brief introduction about why are we talking about this topic, and it's very, very critical. And I'm going to show you that the way things are progressing in terms of our identity as a community, things don't look very promising. So we need to be aware, alert about this topic. So if you have any comments, please do type them in the chat box. So at least I know that you're listening You're not listening. You're here. You're away. Did it make sense what I said so far, or no? It was just completely ununderstandable up until now. I really hope that it was something, at least to some extent, it was clear what I'm trying to say. Okay, because my time is limited, I'm going to go quickly. Okay, Alhamdulillah. So that's quite promising comments. Yes, please, Sheikh. Please go on. Salam, Sheikh. All is clear. Okay, Alhamdulillah. That's perfect. So that gives me a lot of hope, because these kind of topics sometimes are a bit difficult to explain, and especially in an online setting, because I can't see my audience, I can't know their reactions, and there's no even a lot of room for that kind of a very close interaction. But again, your comments are more than welcome. It will make me understand that what's the state of my audience. So let me continue. So let's talk about what forms the correct social identity. And when I say correct, I mean that social identity that we should acquire as a community, such that that identity and that right combination of different components will give us success in this dunya and also in akhirah, as individuals and also as a community. So I'm saying something very big. I'm making a big and a very profound claim that if we don't fix the idea of identity, and if we don't acquire that correct identity, it might mean that the whole community, in worst case, might fall apart. And again, Allah is not guaranteed survival of any community, right? I mean, there are conditions for it. Who knows? Of course, we never wish that such a day comes, but who has guaranteed that this community, with the current potential and the amazing work that it has done, will always survive and also on the right path? There's no guarantee. Who knows? After 100 years, this community might have disintegrated. So we need to make sure that that doesn't happen. So what are those three components of correct social identity? So please carefully read what's on the screen. These three are needed. So these are those essential elements of our identity. And you cannot delete any of these three. If you delete one of these three, one or more of these three, you will be in trouble. You're going to face challenges that will be very, very difficult to manage. But each of these will have to be placed in right amount and right place. That combination of these three identities and components is very important. So what is that? Okay. So I'm going to show you. We need to combine these three elements into our identity as a community. Okay. So if we want happiness, and you can see this person, how happy he is, like he's on the moon. I don't know, I think he was given the glad tiding of Jannah. Like he was told that, look, after this Maha Ramazan, you're going to the paradise. So now, if we want to reach this level of success, we need to combine these three identities in the right amounts and proportion. The Khoja identity, Islamic identity, and also African identity. And when I say African here, I mean in a more limited context. So if I want to say it very clearly, I would say East African identity, because the Khoja Ithna Ashari community mainly is located in this East Africa region, although that also needs a bit of discussion, that there are two units. So you have the Swahili unit, which is these countries, and then we have another unit, which is the French-speaking unit, Madagascar and other areas. That is a different story. But these same discussions will apply there, because it's Africa after all. But I'm going to slightly focus a bit on the East African identity. And if we manage to do so, if we combine these three identities properly and correctly, then it will save us from identity crisis. And I tried to explain that how dangerous identity crisis can be for individuals and communities. If we lose track of what's my role in my life, imagine as an individual, I enter identity crisis. I have no idea what I'm doing in life, what's my goal, why am I here? Is there akhirat or not? What should I be doing? Which occupation should I acquire? It's going to cause havoc in my life. And in the same manner, if a community enters identity crisis, it doesn't know what it stands for, what its goal, what its future is, then that's not a good situation to be in. So this is one thing we want to avoid. And the other thing we want to avoid is domination of Western materialistic identity. And I mentioned this, that what happens after identity crisis for many people is that they just go with the flow. They just take the dominant identity, and which today is the modern world, and a very materialistic identity, and people go by that. And it's not a path that we want to go down as a community. Why? Because it's a path of extravagance, many times path of sins, many times even it leads us, a person, in worst cases, to path of oppressing others. It's something we want to definitely avoid. So, okay, so we want to avoid these things. But you may wonder that we already have the right identity. Why? Because we are Khoja Muslims living in Africa. So all these elements are already there. I'm a Khoja. I know I'm a Khoja. I'm a Muslim. I know I'm a Muslim. And I'm living in Africa. So someone might come around and say that, look, we already have the right identity. Okay. So let me ask you a question, and I would appreciate your answers. And that is that you can see an image on the right side. It's a caricature, right? So my question is, what makes these caricatures look funny? It's a human being, right? It has everything you want. It has head, eyes, nose, teeth, ears, hands, legs. It's a complete human being. What makes it look funny? Who can help me with that? Okay, so Alhamdulillah, I've got, okay, Subhanallah. So it's very, very clear, the answer. So I've got the answer. It's not balanced. The proportion is not there. It's a human being, but it's a rather disproportionate and imbalanced human being. And we don't like it, right? It's a cartoon. It's a caricature, like, okay. So when it comes to identities, it's not enough to live in a country and just think that it's sorted. So I want to say it very clearly here that when it comes to our presence as Khoja community in Africa, in East Africa, although we live in East Africa, the African part of our identity is probably the weakest. And I wouldn't have time, otherwise I would take you to the far past. For example, the first generation of the Khojas who entered Zanzibar, their identity wasn't like that. They had a very prominent element of African identity in them. Okay, so they had that sense of attachment to Africa. They had sense of attachment to Zanzibar, the local people there. They had a sense of belonging to this country where they lived. They had a sense of duty towards the people that they were living with. They were Khojas. They retained their culture. They retain their culture, they retain their language, they retain their even Islamic identity. So, but they had a very important part of their identity, and that was their African identity. They would speak Swahili fluently, they could easily maneuver amongst the people, and they would make good, important contributions, which unfortunately has reduced over the period of time. And that's why I say that living in a country is not sufficient if that sense of belonging, to a certain extent, which I'm going to define. What do I mean that we should have sense of belonging to Tanzania, for example, or Nairobi? Is it I'm promoting some kind of nationalism? Of course not. But it has a certain right meaning, which Islam and the Ahlul Bayt have told us that we need to keep in mind. So just living as Khoja Muslims in Africa is not enough. We need to have that right balance between these three identities. So what's that right balance? So I'm going to very briefly define. Again, I don't have time, so I'm speaking a bit fast because it's an important discussion and I just have these 40 minutes to speak. So why did I say that our identity needs to have these three elements? We need to be Islamic, that must be part of our identity. We need to be Khoja, that also should be part of our identity. And also we need to be African. We need to have certain African identity as well. Why do I say so? Let me run you through the reasons very briefly. Why Islam must be part of our identity? Because Islam, as the final religion sent by God, gives meaning to life. It gives that sense of ultimate purpose to all our activities. So I just mentioned about the month of Ramadan, that why do we cherish this month so much? Why? Because it gives us this unique opportunity to get closer to Allah. And Islam is that religion that has come to give purpose to all our activities. It's that part of our identity that if I strengthen my Islamic identity, it's going to save me from drowning into selfishness and lowly desires. Right? You read the Quran, you go through the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, every single moment they want to take you away from lowly desires, selfishness, sins, and they want to connect you to the divine. Islamic identity, and I emphasize this, and I'm not saying this because I'm a scholar and I like Islam. Of course, I like Islam, but I'm saying this because as a community, as the Khoja Shia Ithna Shari community, it's very, very important for us to keep our Islamic identity intact. That's what's going to save us. And the danger is that if the Islamic identity is weakened, and Billah, a stage comes where it's completely wiped out, and that correct idea of Islam as presented by the Ahlul Bayt, which we as the Khoja community accepted. So this coming on the path of Ahlul Bayt was our choice. Why? Because we saw truth in it. We saw that this path is the haq path. This path is the right path. If we leave this and the Islamic identity is gone, then this community will just be wandering aimlessly. Like, I won't give examples, like other similar communities who strayed away from that right idea of Islam, and now they have no sense of purpose. They're just probably after amassing more wealth after wealth and just going after these material desires. So Islam is definitely an important component of our identity, and it has its place. It's that guiding force. It's the soul that gives life to all our activities. And there's so many verses in the Quran that emphasize this idea of having an Islamic identity. So, I mean, look, so this idea that we are Muslims and this name has been given to us, that Islam, we submit to Allah, was something that was done by Prophet Ibrahim. So this verse of the Quran, Millata abikum Ibrahim, huwa sammakumul muslimina min qabl. So it was Prophet Ibrahim that named us Muslims. Why? Because he wanted to give us a certain identity, a certain tag that, look, this is who you are. This is your purpose in life. This is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to submit to Allah, be a servant of Allah, and inshallah reach that felicity that Allah has guaranteed. Or let me read another verse of the Holy Quran. This is Surah Al-Zumar, verse number 11 and 12. So this is the Holy Prophet speaking. Kul inni umirtu an a'budallaha mukhlisan lahuddin. The Holy Prophet is saying, Allah is saying to the Holy Prophet that say that I have been commanded to worship Allah only with full sincerity. وَأُمِرْتُ لِأَنْ أَكُونَ أَوَّلَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. I have been commanded to be the first of the Muslims, the topmost of submitters. So carrying this Islamic identity confidently, but of course in a logical and balanced manner, is very, very important for our future of our community. And I say this here, any attempt to weaken this Islamic identity whereby people are pushed away from Islam, which gives those life-saving teachings that if Islam is implemented, people will have happier lives, then it's a great disservice being done to the community. So raising strange kind of doubts, confusing people with technical discussions which are not supposed to be discussed in public, all of that is going to eventually lead to a degeneration and weakening of our Islamic identity. And as I mentioned, that if our Islamic identity is lost, everything is lost. Because if our hereafter is lost, if my akhirah is lost, then whatever I gain in this dunya is eventually irrelevant. So this is an important part of our identity. But Does that mean that Islam negates ethnic and tribal identities? So the second part of our identity is the Khoja identity, right? Like we carry this. How? All this, our color, language, cultural norms, attitudes, skills. So you take a whole set of things that make a person a Khoja. So all these things that are there. So this is part of our identity. And if this tribal identity is defined in the right manner, the way Quran has told us, then it's fine. Islam doesn't say that you have to wipe out your tribal identity, and Islam wants everyone to integrate into one single culture with no variety. No, Islam doesn't say that. Islam says that it's fine for us to retain our ethnic identity, but there are conditions, and I'm going to come to that. This Khoja identity element of our full identity of our community can go wrong if there's excessive emphasis on it, whereby in the name of this identity we are pushing away other ethnicities, and especially in the African setting, if it creates such a barrier between our community and the local African community, then that's not what Allah wants. So let me read this famous verse of the Holy Quran, which talks about this ethnic and tribal identities. Ya ayyuhan nas inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha. O people, we created you from a man and a woman. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَكَبَائِلًا, and we divided you into different tribes and these different ethnicities. Why? لِتَعَارَفُوا, so that you get to know each other and so that you can help each other. So Islam is that guiding identity, that superimposing identity, and under the umbrella of Islamic identity, you can have these ethnic identities as long as each of these, they do not negate each other. Each of these, they do not fight with each other. Each of these, they do not, for example, bring such barriers between the communities that now that connection is gone. And sometimes we can see that happening in our case as Khoja community. So this Khoja identity also has a share of its own, but it needs to be in a very accurate amount. If you remove this identity completely, that's also dangerous, because if you completely do away with Khoja heritage and identity, it's going to leave a vacuum for the Western and materialistic culture to come in, because people cannot be without a language, cultural norms, attitudes, values. We can't live as communities detached from our social worlds. No. If you completely destroy the Khoja identity, the modern materialistic, secular, individualistic identity is going to take its place. If you overemphasize the Khoja identity, you'll be pushing away other people, other Muslims, other Shias, and that ideal state of cooperation between different communities is not going to be achieved. So it's a very fine and delicate balance. But there's a third part to our identity, which I really feel I don't have time to explain it more. My time is almost up. I'll just take 9 more minutes and I'll finish. And that is that we need to also work on the African element of our identity. And what do I mean by that? So, do I mean that I subscribe to some kind of an incorrect idea of African nationalism? Of course not. I'm not saying that. Does it mean that I leave my own ethnic and cultural elements and completely assimilate into the African local identities? So the Swahili culture, the Swahili identity, I completely become like them and I completely wipe out my Khoja identity? No, it doesn't mean that. What does it mean? This is very important, that Africa is the place, and you can specify it to a certain country, Tanzania, Kenya, wherever our communities are there. This is the place where we live and we interact with other tribes and nations. It is where Allah has destined us to do khidmat and guide others. So this is our battleground. This is our ground where we have to serve humanity, to serve people, to guide them towards the right path, to contribute to the society. And unfortunately, I feel that this element is very, very weak in our community, and especially in the younger generation. Why? Because everyone wants to just grow up in East Africa and then just go to the West, just leave this country. Why? Because that African element of identity, that sense of belonging to this country, those people, a sense whereby I feel like I've lived with these people, I need to help them. And they need a lot of help, right? And the Khoja community, with all the resources that it has, can really, really contribute a lot to the Khoja community. And we already have examples of people doing good amounts of contribution. This is our destiny. Allah has chosen us, has put. Otherwise, imagine how comes this Khoja community, which is originally an Indian community, ended up in East Africa. I mean, we can imagine that Allah had something in mind. We have a duty with respect to Africa, and it's incorrect to imagine that contribution can only be made if I go to the West. Sometimes this idea is there that if I want to contribute, do khidmah, serve people, for example, I have to go to the West and serve. No, we don't have to turn our eyes towards another country. Yes, mu'mineen in those countries should think about contributing to their societies. But you all, and generally the Shia Khoja Isnashari community is living in East Africa, their first priority should be to contribute to the local people and do khidmat there, do service there. Look at how much Islam emphasizes on contributing in your surroundings. So I'll just give you two small examples. My time is running out. So when Amirul Mu'mineen sent Malik al-Ashtar to Egypt, okay, so Malik al-Ashtar is not an Egyptian. Okay, he doesn't belong there. He's from another tribe. He's Arab from Arabia. Egyptians are completely different. So he's placing him as a governor there. Look what he tells him, that look, Malik al-Ashtar, you're going there. Now your duty is towards the Egyptian people. That's what now you should focus on. He says that when you go there, remember this, that people there are of two types. Imma akhun laka fid din. People there are either your brothers in religion, أو شبيه لك في الخلق, or they're similar to you in your humanity, they're human beings. So probably Amirul Mu'mineen is telling us, the Khoja Shia Ithna Ashari community, which is living in East Africa, that look, the people there, the larger African society, imma akhun laka fi din, either they are your brothers in faith, they're Muslims, they're Shias, and even if they're not of the same faith, shabihun laka fil qalb, they're human beings, they have needs, they have a place where we can contribute. How much the Ahlul Bayt were attentive of the social duty of contributing to the less, to the downtrodden and oppressed people around them. All of the imams would go out at nights and give food to poor people. You think they would ask their ethnicity before giving them food? They would say that, okay, if you're an Arab, I would give you. No, to whatever extent they could, they would contribute to the larger society. And there are many, many examples of this, that this social responsibility is a very important theme that we have. So, I've tried to define that right balance. My time is almost up. I just wanted to even give a few examples of what's the incorrect balance. What happens if this, so what I've just done is that, okay, let me summarize what I've said. What I've been trying to say is that we as the community need to take hold of these three identities together, but in the right proportion. Islam is an important part of our identity because that's our guiding force. That tells us what's the purpose in life, that there is a God. We have a journey to make. We also have our ethnic identity. So that also needs to be kept in proportion, in balance. And we also need to work on this African part of our identity, which unfortunately I feel has weakened over generations. It wasn't so weak, for example, when our forefathers entered Zanzibar. They had a very strong sense of commitment and attachment to that local culture. I mean, imagine, I mean, talk to those people who grew up in that Jangbari area and that culture. They cherish it even today. Why? Because that attachment is there. Entry of many Swahili words into Gujarati is a sign of cultural interaction, a healthy cultural interaction, that these words still remain today. So we need to think about these things, themes, and see that how we can rebuild these identities. So I wanted to give a few examples of imbalance of these identities. I'll skip that. I'm just going to show you. I had said that the current state with the new generation, and I'm speaking to all of you. You are the new generation. Most of you are. I'm assuming most of my audience are the youth. Look, things don't look very promising in terms of our score on these identities. So let me tell you what's happening. So Khoja identity is declining and is being replaced by the Western culture and identity. It's a threat. It's a problem. Because if you do away with the Khoja identity and the elements, and I feel, and I say this very, very clearly, that the biggest blow to this Khoja identity and heritage was that we have almost lost our language. So language is a very, very strong carrier of ethnic identities. Ethnicities are preserved using languages, and ours is a unique example where our community willingly gave away its language and adopted English as the primary language. And of course, the influence of media and so many other things, educational system, and there's so many factors. Inshallah, tomorrow I'll speak about the effect of the modern world on our children and how it's affecting all these identities. So I'm going to speak about, so my tomorrow's topic is very closely related to this, that our children are being heavily affected by the materialistic ideology and values. So although this is my reading, you may disagree, but this is what I feel, that the Khoja identity is kind of declining and is being replaced by Western culture and identity. What about Islamic identity? I would say the situation is not so bad. Generally, the whole community is Islamic, is following. Just there's a small issue, although not a small, to be honest. There's an issue there that still Islam is very compartmentalized and limited. We limit it to very specific spheres like mosque and only religious programs, and when it comes to other issues like our lifestyle and everything, Islam's contribution is missing, while Islam has a lot to give in those areas. So our family life, you all know how big it is a problem, divorce rates and everything, families breaking apart, again another sign of the influence of the Western culture and materialism seeping in. So Islam can come and rescue us, but I think we have limited Islam to a very small area. We need to open up a bit and benefit more from Islam. So that's about Islamic identity. We can really work on strengthening it and benefiting, and we can really benefit from these beautiful teachings that we have from Ahlul Bayt. Believe me, I'm not saying because I don't know, because I love the Ahlul Bayt. Of course, I love the Ahlul Bayt, but I'm saying because when you look at these teachings, they tell you that, wow, they're so logical. Amazing teachings that you have about family, about society, about community relationships, about dealing with other communities. For everything Islam has, and the Ahlul Bayt have given us plenty of teachings. We need to open up and broaden our horizon and our view about Islam. Islam has a lot to offer. Ahlul Bayt have a lot to offer. We are not truly benefiting. And of course, the African identity, I mentioned many times that it's becoming extremely weak. And as I mentioned, one of the signs is that there's so much immigration happening, especially in the younger generation, that again, it needs analysis and discussion that why is this happening? Is it healthy for our communities? Some people might say it's fine. I mean, what difference does it make? They live here or there. I personally feel that it's an issue of concern. It relates to the future of our community in Africa, and it's going to, if people grow there, benefit from the society and resources there, and then all of them, they want to leave this community and go and resettle in other communities, I think we have lost a very, very, very important opportunity to contribute to Africa, contribute to the local people there. And believe me, those who have done that, they have had such a fulfilling and satisfying experience. What's lacking is that African element of our identity is becoming very, very weak. That sense of attachment, sense of belonging, sense of duty, contribution is becoming weak. We need to do something about it. So I'll stop here, and this is what I wanted to present. So what I've given you is I've explained to you the current state of our identity, my current slide, and I tried to give you a picture of what's that right balance between these three identities: Islam, Khoja identity, and the African identity. And if inshallah we are able to combine these three in this right manner, which I tried to describe, then inshallah we will move forward strongly as a community. So this is the right combination. You can see it in the last slide. I'm not going to read it. Okay, let me even quickly read it. Islam. What's the place of Islam in our identity? It defines our worldview, values, goals, lifestyle, and it gives us those guiding principles in life. And Islam doesn't say that wipe out your ethnic identities, just do away with it. Khoja is our tribal identity. It needs to be protected and saved. Otherwise, identity crisis or domination of Western culture and values will occur. However, this identity should not be so rigid that we push away other ethnicities, especially local Africans. We need to redefine our connection with the broader society and how we interact and deal with them. And the last part of our identity, that right combination, would be that we should see Africa as the place where Allah has chosen us to serve people, to khidmat, to other believers and other human beings, and guide them to the right path. So I come to the end of my session. I have few minutes, so I have 6 minutes. I mean, probably can extend it to 10 minutes because the idea was to have last 10 minutes for question and answer. So I stop here. I thank you all for your time and attention. If there are any questions, you're free to ask. Easiest would be turn on your mic and just start speaking. If you don't want to do that, that's fine as well. You can type your questions on chat as well. So I'll end with, let us all end with a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So I'm there. If there are any questions, comments you want to make, please go ahead. Okay, so I can see questions coming in. Let me read one by one. If anyone wants to even ask a live question, that's fine as well. Okay. Okay, so the first question is, does your responsibility and duty depend on where you live currently? India. I am born and brought up in Dubai, and I'm married here in Africa. Let me read the full question. My culture is a total mix of the above. So it's a very interesting and important question, that where does my responsibility lie? So I would answer it like this, that yes, I would say that the most natural option to choose a place for contribution and responsibility is the place where I know I'm going to live for long. Like, for example, I have decided to live in this country for a very long period of time. For example, this sister mentioned that I'm married here in Africa, and probably that would mean that a good portion of my this sister's life is going to be spent in that location. So again, I'm saying this, let me say this very clearly, that look, eventually where you decide to contribute is a matter of your choice. So there's no compulsion in that, but there are some natural and better options for that. And if I live in a country, although I have a mixed culture, but my presence there makes a big impact on my contribution. If I'm present there, if I'm interacting with the people there, if I slowly make an effort to learn their language, understand them better, then I would say that probably that's the best option to contribute. And I say this again, that please, let's not just think about contributing as individuals. Yes, that's fine, you can contribute. Let's think about contributing as groups, like teams. So imagine that, for example, the person who asked this question, the sister teams up with other sisters and they together make an effort to contribute to the local society. I'm saying that this would be the most natural and probably the most productive choice. Okay. So first question, again, I'm answering very briefly. If people have asked the questions, they have more specific questions, they can ask me later. I'm on those WhatsApp group that's made for both brothers and sisters separately. So you can post your questions if you think that you want to post them in front of others. I'll try and answer them. You can even message me on my number, and I'll try and answer if there are more questions. So let me move to the second question. So the second question is that, do you think that there is probably a conflict between our community identity and Islamic identity when it comes to our socio-political roles in the light of supporting the oppressed, especially participating in Quds rallies? So I'll answer this question by going back to what I mentioned, and that is that if we give all these three identities its place, if we give Islamic identity its right place, if we give our cultural identity its right place, the Khoja identity, then ideally conflict should not happen. So, but if you see places where conflict is happening and sometimes we are torn apart, okay, the root cause of that being torn apart is that there's some problem in how we have defined our identities. Maybe we are letting certain identity overstep its bounds. So when it comes to these kind of issues where our socio-political role is being asked, that what's our role in these kind of issues, for example, participating Quds Day rally, supporting the oppressed, we would go back to the Islamic identity and we'll ask that, based on the teachings of Islam, based on what the experts and scholars have told us, what is the approach we should take. And based on that expert guidance, we would allow Islamic identity to tell us and guide us on this matter, because it's a very sensitive matter, right? It's a sensitive matter and it's an important role that we have to do. So if we put the culture and ethnic identity in its right place, and so I'd given those examples, I skipped those, is that we shouldn't allow our ethnic identity to go to such an extent whereby we start now completely deleting the Islamic identity. And in extreme cases, it happens, right? It can happen that you might find individuals who have completely lost their Islamic identity. They don't subscribe to teachings of Islam anymore. For example, they've even left those Islamic outwardly actions like hijab and other things. And now, as I mentioned, that when that Islamic identity goes away, it's automatically replaced today by a very regular, materialistic, secular identity. And then the only thing that remains is that that Khoja element remains, and whereby this person just feels that I just need to contribute to my people, and that's what matters. And there's no higher goals, higher duties which are defined by Islam. So we need to give all these things their right and due place in order to properly make proper decisions as community, and what answers and what actions we should be taken in these kind of issues, and for example this specific issue that's pointed out here. So probably that's an answer that I can give. So the bottom line is that I don't know, I would really like to get your feedback on the topic generally, like did it make sense, or it was all just Greek. Secondly, about if you have any comments, any questions, I'll really appreciate, because these kind of topics are rarely, or they're less discussed. I'm not saying rarely, we have avenues and platforms where we discuss these kind of topics, but it's not something which is common amongst the youth, where we are thinking about the future of our community, our identity, our relationship with Islam, our relationship with our tribal ethnic identity, our relationship with the country we live. These are very critical issues. The first step always begins by thinking about these things. Yeah, so there's one more question. I think probably I'll answer that and we'll stop here. What practical steps can we take to keep our culture and identity intact? So I'll say two things. Again, still they are very general in nature, but these are very important. The first step would be to define the scope and boundary of culture, that we shouldn't overstep it. So for example, we shouldn't let uh, our culture and identity, and I mean the ethnic identity, grows so big that now it starts putting under question our Islamic identity, or it grows so big and rigid that we have no element of African identity. So we don't want that. We want a balance between these three. So let's say we define that balance and we say that, okay, these elements of our culture we need to protect. Then we'll have to list them down. What needs to be protected? So, for example, I'm just giving examples. So, for example, language is very important. Of course, I'm not saying that don't learn English. And we all know that English is an important language. We all need to learn it. And believe me, we're anyways going to learn it because we send our children to school. They're anyways going to learn it. So that's not a concern. What's a concern is that we're losing our local language, which is at least it helps us preserve our ethnic identity. And so that's one thing. We'll have to list down these elements which are there. Although there's one thing I'll say that sometimes in our ethnic and Khoja identity, we might have elements that we need to slowly and gradually delete them or reform them or change them. That's also a thing. But because it's a sensitive matter, and of course it will need another session description to go through. So basically we'll have to list down what are those elements of our cultural, local, I mean ethnic identity that we need to preserve. For example, language will be one. Some regular norms of dealing with how we deal and interact with people, we need to preserve a whole list. But there will be things that we will have to slowly even change and reform in our uh, um, uh, ethnic identity, and especially if those things are going against Islam. So as I mentioned, that Islam is that a bigger umbrella, that soul, that guiding force, that now all these other identities will have to conform to that. So for example, if we see an element in our ethnic identity, Khoja identity, that we see that is not very healthy, it's not a good attitude that we have, it's not good, it's not a good, for example, akhlaqi quality we have, we'll need to slowly and gradually even think of reforming and refining our identity as well, because it's a constant process. It's not something that set in stone and that you can't do. We have seen this ourselves, right? We changed our language, we lost our language. So that's a big change that we have. So it needs to be done carefully. It needs guidance, it needs initiative, it needs involvement of the leadership, it needs involvement of the scholars and ulama. It's not something that at the community level can be done just by one thing, but as individuals we can think about those positive elements of our ethnic identity, we preserve them, and the negative elements we need to sift them. So someone has asked a relevant question. So a lot of traditions exist that mix with our culture and our heritage that are inconvenient, dealing with relatives, neighbors, and formalities that we are tied to. What is the fine line that divides those traditions with the Khoja? This is a very excellent question, and I was going to point as explaining this exact same thing. So we need to list down our Khoja heritage and all the elements, probably list down, for example, 100 elements. And then using the criteria that Islam and our intellect gives us, and we need to go through each of them and see which of these we need to preserve, which of these are secondary, it's okay if they go, it's fine. For example, food preferences, if they change a bit, it's fine. But no, language is important, we need to preserve. We also need to identify those negative elements of our culture. So for example, if I'm just giving examples, I don't want to point to specific things. Let's say there's a certain way of dealing with, for example, neighbors that's not healthy. And again, what's the criteria of deciding not healthy? It's Islam and intellect. We throw it back to Islam and Islamic teachings, and we see, is it correct Islamically, this behavior which is part of our culture? Or no, it needs to be changed. We logically think about it. Is it healthy for a community? If we say it's not healthy for a community, then those elements definitely need to be sifted and filtered. So even when we say that we need to preserve our Khoja heritage, it comes with these conditions and uh, these things I'm describing. So I'll stop here. So I've exceeded my time. I know that people will be tired, and especially with this kind of a topic, which I don't know, it was easy, difficult, I'm not so sure. So I'll stop here. As I mentioned, if there are any questions, you can ask on the WhatsApp group, and I'll try and answer them. Inshallah, I'll see you tomorrow again with the second part of our discussion, and that's going to be very, very critical and important, and that is the children of our community and how the modern world is negatively impacting them, and we need to do something. Thank you all for your time.
Ahsan Sheikh, thank you very much for the informative session. Before we leave, because we're already leaving, inshallah, I'm reminding you for our session tomorrow, which is at 5:15 to 6:15 p.m. There's also a quiz at the end of all courses, so please keep in mind that you need to be reviewing these. We'll send the notes also, inshallah, in due time. There's also a third course which we have, which will circulate and has already been circulated. So inshallah, if the rest could also take some time and register for those courses, inshallah. And Sheikh, thank you very much for your time. Inshallah, we meet tomorrow. Khuda Hafiz.
Keep us in your du'as. Fi aman.
Inshallah.